Welcome to ImmigrationQuestion.com's weekly live streaming program that navigates the complex world of U.S. immigration. Each week, we're joined by immigration attorneys, policymakers, and immigrant advocates who share their insights and expertise. Join us every Friday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as we explore the latest developments, trends, and best practices in U.S. immigration, from H-1Bs to DACA, and from family sponsorship to citizenship. Make our weekly live streaming program your go-to resource for staying informed and up to date on all things U.S. immigration. Today, we have an exciting speaker lined up for you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another interesting episode of our live stream program covering subject recent developments in Parole in Place program. My name is Maliha and I will be your host for today. I'm delighted to have you all here as we discuss the latest updates and expansions related to Parole in Place program, an essential topic for many mixed families and others affected by immigration issues. In today's session, we will delve into the recent expansion of Parole in Place program, its eligibility criteria, application process, and potential benefits it offers to certain individuals and families. We'll also discuss some of the key considerations and challenges that applicants may encounter in the application process. To gain a deeper insight into the recent changes and their impact, we are pleased to have with us today Mr. Jacob Attorney Jacob. He is an U.S. immigration attorney with high focus on employment-based transactional cases, permanent residence applications such as PERM, national interest waivers, and others. His passion for helping businesses extend beyond immigration law. And he also offers expertise in business immigration law for its purposes. It's a huge pleasure to have you join us today, Mr. Jacob.
Thanks, Malia. I appreciate it. You're making me sound nice. I'm glad to be here with you all, and I'm glad to talk about the recent updates in the Parole in Place program. So I'm just going to walk right into it. A lot of my presentation today, I'll be sharing my screen with you. Honestly, a lot of the updates that we're discussing, they were recently announced as of 2 hours ago. So we'll be walking through these together. And I'm going to start off by explaining the significance of the program, talk about what parole even is, and then we'll talk about how this new Parole in Place update might benefit you. So we'll just kind of walk through there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let's see. Anybody let me know, please someone let me know if you're not able to see this. So the reason why parole matters ultimately in this context is for you to apply for adjustment of status, meaning to receive permanent residency in the U.S., you need to have been either inspected and admitted into the U.S., meaning that you presented a visa and you were able to legally come into the United States, or alternatively, that you were inspected and paroled. So paroled is different from admission. There's honestly, could be a hour-long discussion in and of itself explaining the differences, but basically parole is a legal entry into the U.S. that's not technically an admission. Now, the reason why this matters again is because for you to qualify for adjustment of status through 245A adjustment, meaning family-based adjustment. In this context, it also includes other types of adjustment of status, but that's generally what we're talking about. You have to have satisfied one of these conditions. And so while many people who've entered the U.S. without authorization do not have a legal admission, since they do not have a visa, this Parole in Place program allows for people to obtain essentially a legal entry via parole, which then allows them to qualify for adjustment of status. So in the past, there are other types of programs, including something called Parole in Place for people with military families, or if you were the beneficiary of older petitions before certain dates in 2001 or earlier, you could benefit from a similar type of parole process. But now this has expanded to include a number of additional people. And that's what I'm going to walk through next with you, are the requirements to be included in this Parole in Place updates. So I'm going to go ahead and click over here. So again, this was just released like 2 hours ago from USCIS. So this is from their newsroom. It's titled USCIS Publishes Filing Guide for Keeping Families Together. So normally how it happens is when there's an update in immigration law as far as a regulatory update, they publish it in something called the Federal Registrar. This one has just been published apparently on the USCIS website, and they walk through the requirements of applying for this benefit. So again, the number one thing to keep in mind is that no one should file for this before August 19th. So before Monday, please don't file this. They're not going to accept it. They have published this guide. It's called this filing guide. It's a separate PDF. We will go over this after we finish going through the rest of the announcement that walks through how to complete the paperwork for this. One other point that I want to discuss here is that this form is going to be filed entirely online, just bolded right here. So I'm going to be honest with you all. I personally have not had the best experience with filing online forms with USCIS. I think a lot of times their logins on their online profiles are not the easiest interface to work with, but nevertheless, I think this is going to be really beneficial for case tracking. It's going to be a lot easier to monitor your case status by having this filed online. One important point is every single requester. So if you have minor children that are also applying for this, you're going to need to create your own separate USCIS account and file the separate I-131F as a part of that. Okay. The last point they just want to mention here is that sadly, there are many people who try to take advantage of indigent communities, including immigrants, and people who participate in immigration scams. So they just mention again that you should only accept advice, legal advice pertaining to immigration law from a licensed attorney. So just something to keep in mind. And this is just their warnings here. So we're going to go ahead and go over now to this filing guide for the I-131F, which I have right here. And we're going to just kind of briefly walk through this. And mainly I'm going to discuss the eligibility requirements and just kind of walk through common pitfalls on USCIS forms that I normally see. Again, disclaimer, I have never filed one of these because this was just released and it's not even possible to file yet until August 19th. But I'm happy to go over some common pitfalls that I see with USCIS form completion and give some general guidance as to how I would proceed. Okay, so we're going to scroll down. They got a nice little cover page here, and they're including some screenshots here from the USCIS portal, from the online portal, showing what the interface will look like. So for you to see this form, you are going to need to create your USCIS online account. So after this call, if you are eligible for this process, I would recommend that you go and at least create your account right now, because it can be a painful process. You are going to need to have two-factor authentication and have like a backup password as well that you're going to want to store. So just as a heads up. Okay, let's go through the requirements here. And some of these are pretty interesting requirements. And I would just pay close attention to this to make sure that you can actually benefit from this process. Okay, so who may file Form I-131F? A non-citizen spouse or stepchild of a U.S. citizen may request parole in place under this process if they, and here are the conditions, are present in the U.S. without admission or parole. Okay, so this is a very interesting point to list here, because this would essentially weed out those who had entered the U.S. lawfully. So if you had entered with a non-immigrant visa, you came to the U.S. lawfully, and then you had overstayed, you would technically not be eligible for this program based on this requirement. Again, would that really be necessary? If you were married to a U.S. citizen, no, because lawful entry, if you have a lawful entry and are married to a U.S. citizen, then you don't need to worry about having a parole or admission anyway, since you have one. But that's something to keep in mind. You need to have entered without admission or parole. Number 2, you need to have been continuously physically present in the U.S. since June 17th, 2014, if you're seeking parole in place as the spouse of a U.S. citizen. Okay, so you have to be, again, June 17th, 2014, if you are applying as a spouse of an American citizen. You have to have physically been in the U.S. Okay. Alternatively, if the relevant date is June 17th, 2024, if you are a stepchild of a U.S. citizen. Again, for a stepchild, it's going to talk about it right here. I'll wait until that bullet point. The next analysis is whether you have the qualifying relationship with you and the U.S. citizen. So if you're the spouse, you need to have a legally valid marriage as of June 17, 2024. So if you were married after June 17, 2024, unfortunately, you are not included in this process. You're not going to be able to apply under this process. Now, as a stepchild, you need to show that your parent, the non-citizen parent, had this legal marriage to your U.S. citizen step-parent before June 17, 2024, and before you turned 18. So that's always been a rule. A stepchild can only be petitioned by their step-parent if the marriage took place before the child's 18th birthday. That's what was required. So that's still listed here. Again, have to be married before June 17, 2024. And you have to, if you're a stepchild, make sure your parent was married to the U.S. citizen before June 17, 2024. Last 2 requirements: you do not have any disqualifying criminal history. So this one is going to be a discretionary analysis from everything that I can see from USCIS. I would just consult with an immigration attorney if you have any disqualifying criminal history. Now, some common types of criminal history that I would watch out for are some things called crimes involving moral turpitude. This is a legal term. Basically, the easiest way to think about this in general terms is that they are crimes which are considered morally reprehensible. I would say some of the crimes that generally come up that you would not think fall under that purview, but do are like retail theft and also controlled substance use. That's one of the ones that I would watch out for here. Okay. Again, consult with an immigration attorney or a criminal attorney to make sure that they are informed and that you're consulted properly if this applies to you. Last point, you do not pose a threat to national security and public safety. Again, this is going to be ultimately, this is a discretionary grant by USCIS. So they're going to take your individual facts on a case-by-case basis and determine whether you pose this type of threat to national security and public safety or not. Okay. All right. So the final thing that USCIS wants to convey is that even if you meet the criteria to seek a discretionary grant of parole, USCIS may deny your request if we determine that a grant of parole is not warranted in your case. Okay, so this is pretty similar across the board from USCIS discretionary cases. So, for example, EB2 national interest waivers are very similar, where ultimately you're essentially at the mercy of USCIS. A lot of times there's not even reviewability in a federal court for your request. So even if USCIS gets it wrong and you want to challenge it, a lot of times, since it's discretionary, there's not even grounds to take it to court. Okay, so something to keep in mind. Final point here, I consider this a silver lining. Even if you're in removal proceedings or have an order of removal, you may still qualify for parole. So even if you've received a notice to appear before an immigration judge, or you are otherwise in immigration proceedings or have a removal order, I would still consult with an immigration attorney to see if this program can benefit you, if you qualify. Okay. So we're going to go through here right now. This is going to be the beginning of the online application. So just make sure that you read and review the eligibility requirements, once again, just to make sure that you're ultimately qualified. If you have any questions about it, I would consult with an attorney. Okay, and then this is where you will go through and proceed with the application. So you'll go through and select next. And it's going to start right here. This actually looks substantially similar to most other online immigration forms that I have seen filled out or I've filled out myself. You just have to go through and make sure that you answer all possible applicable answers, okay? So you'll want to make sure that you select whether you're applying as a spouse or a stepchild. If you are a stepchild, there's a chance to enter in your parents' I-131F receipt number, enter in your identifying information as your names, nothing really crazy there. Same thing with phone and emails. Contact address, obviously important to include. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more just to make sure everyone can see, okay? Okay. Physical address and mailing address, just make sure you specify that information. Again, nothing out of the ordinary. If you've ever submitted an immigration application, you need to make sure you include this information. Same thing with your identifying information, date of birth, country of birth, country of citizenship and nationality, your physical characteristics. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about those. Just want to make sure. Okay, I just want to make sure if there's anything else that I should clarify. Okay, an alien number. So an A number stands for an alien number. Also is referred to as a USCIS number. If you've ever had an employment authorization document, you would see that you have an A number. If you have applied for an immigrant benefit, then you would have an A number. Otherwise, you won't have one yet. So you can just put, I do not know. Same thing with a social. You probably don't have one, so go ahead and put that there. And you probably don't have a USCIS online account number. Even if you do and don't remember it, I wouldn't worry too much about this. Okay, just going to finish up here. Identifying information. You'll want to make sure to, again, confirm your physical presence in the U.S. Again, you want to make sure you have that June 17th, 2014 date if you're a spouse, and June 17th, 2024 if you're a step-parent or stepchild, excuse me. Very important. Make sure you answer all these other admissibility questions. Same thing if you've ever been arrested or have convictions, just make sure you're honest with USCIS so they don't make a finding that you are inadmissible for misrepresentation or fraud. Again, if you have any questions about this, I would consult with an attorney. This form is actually quite a bit longer than I expected on this. If anybody has any specific questions on this, feel free to reach out again to me or to another attorney who can help you with analyzing your evidence and your eligibility for this. But this is where you'll upload your documents. And ultimately, if you're interested in this process, I would again visit the USCIS website, follow this eligibility guide, and if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, Attorney Jacob, for the that was a very straight dive in. Thank you. Thank you so much for the thorough breakdown of the program, and I'm pretty sure the audience can say the same also. Before we go further, please feel free to submit your questions via the chatbot feature at any time. We'll address them during our Q&A session later in the webinar. We have some good news also to share with you shortly, but do well listen through the program. Something exciting is coming from immigration.com, from immigrationquestion.com your way. Now, Mr. Jacob, PIP offers significant benefits, including protection from deportation, the ability to apply for work authorization, and in some cases, the opportunity to adjust status to that of a lawful permanent resident. To break it more evenly for our audience, what are main limitations involved? Who are those not applicable to apply for this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say ultimately those who don't meet the physical presence requirement, there's no way to fix that based off of this program. If you weren't here on the specific time frame, there's no way to fix that. I would also say those who have overstayed their visas and who are not married to U.S. citizens, there's not a lot of other benefits there's no benefits from this process for those people as well.
That was quite insightful, Mr. Jacob. Thank you so much for addressing the question. Moving on to our next question. What are the common challenges applicants may encounter and strategies to overcome them?
I'd say common challenges. If I was anticipating, again, without having seen anybody file for this yet, I would say for those who have, let's say, minor criminal history as well, let's say you've had a DUI, you have incidents of disorderly conduct or something, those challenges, USCIS may ask for additional evidence related to those incidences. I would just be sure to request all of the records from the police department and court to show that there's been a final resolution to your case. And then I would try and provide evidence that you have been rehabilitated and that you have not had any additional incidences, since that time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the insight here, Mr. Jacob. Also, for the audience, whether just tuning in or have been with us from the start, this is immigrationquestions.com live streaming program. Immigrationquestion.com is transforming how immigrants connect with experienced immigration attorneys. Ask your question for free and we'll connect you with a verified attorney on our platform. We like to call it the meeting place for immigrants and attorneys. For attorneys, immigrationquestion.com is your chance to grow your practice significantly. Sign up today and start boosting our firm's growth. Please keep your questions coming in. Our special guest will be answering them now. We'll open the floor now for the question and answer. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat box and we'll try to address as many as possible. We already have a question from Mr. James. Is it possible to change from F1 to H1B while in school?
It's a great question, James. A stupid lawyer answer, it depends. So the biggest hurdle in applying for an H-1B, besides having an employer, is whether you have the credentials to say that you can work in a specialty occupation. Easy way to explain, if you have a bachelor's degree or the equivalent in experience. So I will say most often, many of my clients already have bachelor's degrees that they've obtained in their home countries or outside of the U.S. And then they're coming to complete additional studies in the U.S., let's say a master's program or a second bachelor's. They can use their previous bachelor's as long as it's the equivalent of a bachelor's in the U.S. to obtain an H-1B while in school. So you can still sign up for the H-1B lottery, or if you're able to get a cap-exempt H-1B, you can totally do that in school. Again, as long as you already have a bachelor's degree or the equivalent in experience.
Thank you so much for the insight, Mr. Jacob. Thank you so much. That was a thorough breakdown. I would like to give you a window to give your contact details. We have a few clients who would like to know on how to contact you, if at all they'd like to reach out to you for the advice.
For sure. Is it okay if I share my screen one more time? Just share
yes,
our
of
email.
Course. Mm-hmm.
Sweet. All right. Yeah. For anybody who'd like to reach out, this is our phone number and email address, and where we're located. We specialize in immigration, primarily employment immigration. So if you have any questions, at the very least, we're happy to point you in the right direction.
Absolutely, Mr. Jacob. And Mr. James says, thank you very much. You're very welcome, Mr. James. Moving on to our next question, Mr. Jacob. I'd like to understand the difference between parole in place and the current applications that we are having, like asylum, like the waiver, 601A waiver. How is it going to be different? How is it going to benefit the citizen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this is kind of related to Helsinki's question too. I can touch on that. So I'd say the biggest difference is that the 601A requires you to physically leave the United States. Although you're essentially asking for forgiveness for having entered illegally without inspection, admission, or parole. And once you're forgiven for that in the U.S., you have to leave the U.S. and go through an immigrant visa interview at a foreign consulate. So understandably, that's quite nerve-wracking for people who entered the U.S. illegally, and now they're having to leave. And even though they have this waiver, it's a scary process because you don't know what could happen at the consulate. So I'd say this definitely is going to alleviate a lot of anxiety for people who can qualify, because you can get adjustment of status here now. You won't have to leave. You can get your green card in the States. I think Helsinki's question was about, can I do this at the same time? Oh yeah, here we go. Thanks. If I can I apply for parole in place if I currently have a pending application for another immigration benefit? Yeah, that's a great question. As long as you meet the requirements for this parole in place, you totally can. You're not precluded from applying for any additional immigration benefits just because you're in the middle of one. So yeah, have at it. If you qualify, go for it, man.
Thank you so much, Attorney Jacob, for addressing the questions. We have another question coming from Maya. What is the expected timeline for processing parole in place applications under the new rules, please?
Maya, that is a great question. I'm not even going to lie to you. I don't even have a good estimate for you here. If I was being honest and just guessing, compared to when USCIS has rolled out similar programs for humanitarian parole, they were not fast. I would say it's definitely going to take, again, this is totally just Jacob spitballing here, but I would say don't expect this to be done quickly. Sorry.
Well, you don't have to be sorry. Thank you so much for giving a very honest answer. We have another question. I'm undocumented and married to a U.S. citizen, but I have a criminal record. Will this affect my eligibility for parole in place?
Yeah, good question, Anonymous. Great question here. So let's assume that you meet the requirements. You're physically here since June 17, 2014. And you've been married to your U.S. citizen spouse before June 17, 2024. Honestly, it depends on your criminal record. Ultimately, this is a discretionary benefit. So I won't lie to you and say it definitely won't affect your process. It certainly could. I would say depending on, ultimately, for these discretionary benefits, you need to convince USCIS why the positives of admitting you, granting your requested benefit, outweigh the negatives. So if you can show, let's say, letters of recommendation from your community, you can show you're involved in charities, that you're a good family person, you're well respected at work, and you're a contributing member of society, and your criminal record is relatively minor comparatively, then it's totally possible that you could overcome that problem. But again, it would totally depend on your individual facts. I'd go talk to a lawyer about your specific record just to check it out.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jacob, and I totally agree with you on that. We should always reach out to an immigration attorney for such cases. We have another question, again from Mr. Gustav. How does the recent expansion affect for those who are currently in removal proceedings?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gustav. So even the I-131F guide clarified that this could still be of benefit for those in removal proceedings. I'll just give you an example of what I could see, how I could see this being beneficial. Excuse me. So many times when you are in removal proceedings, you receive something called a notice to appear, basically where you are told you have to appear before an immigration judge because you are most commonly inadmissible, meaning you're not supposed to be in the United States for X, Y, and Z reasons. One of the most common reasons is that you are entered the United States without inspection, admission, or parole. Now, by having this parole in place program, and if you were married to a U.S. citizen, you might have a path forward to essentially fixing that inadmissibility if you meet the requirements for the parole in place. Most of the time, if you try to apply for a 601A waiver, basically to apply for forgiveness for entering without authorization, an immigration judge is basically not going to grant that. In my opinion, they're not, if you're in removal proceedings, because of the length of time it takes to process and because you have to leave the country. It's basically a deportation order. But now they would have grounds to essentially terminate proceedings if you're able to basically fix the only reason that you're inadmissible. Again, this is a super general, limited example, but I would talk, again, self-serving. I would talk to an attorney about this, though.
Absolutely, totally agree with you on that, Mr. Jacob. Moving on to our next question from Ray. Can someone with PIP status apply for green card directly, or are there any other steps?
Yeah, this is a good question. So ultimately, for you to apply for the green card, you need to file for the adjustment of status. So this just is essentially fixing your issue of not having a lawful entry. So by having this approved, then you would be able to qualify for adjustment of status. So again, this is totally just newly rolled out, but what I'm assuming is going to happen is once you have the I-131F approval notice, you will be able to file the I-485 form to adjust status here in the United States without having to leave the U.S. So yeah, that's the form you would have to file. Additionally, it's called the I-485, at least as it's to my knowledge, based on the rollout.
Thank you for taking the time to provide such a thorough breakdown, Mr. Jacob. Moving on to our next question. Can I apply for a work permit while my parole in place application is still pending?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, to be honest, I don't think I saw this on the guide. So generally, you won't file for a work permit when you are waiting for a 601 waiver, for example. But you usually have to file for the work permit while your adjustment of status is pending. Honestly, I'm going to go and check the instructions for the I-765. It might be possible to do this. Honestly, I don't know for sure. Again, since this is so new of a program, I would check the I-765 instructions to see if it stipulates whether you can file, whether they list this as a category. There are certain types of parole where if you're granted it, you could apply for, or deferred action, I should say, where you're essentially granted authorization to work. You can apply for work authorization. I will say, if I was guessing, I would say probably not. But again, I would check the updated instructions to see if it allows for it. Without 100% verify, I'm going to say probably not.
Thank you so much, Attorney Jacob. Your insights were truly valuable and the breakdown you provided was exceptionally clear and informative. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Now, moving to the good news, I come bearing. We are glad to announce that you can now listen to any sessions of this live streaming program from anywhere, anytime. We are live on Spotify. This session and all the future ones will be recorded and will be available for you to listen on Spotify. Just search Borderless Talk by immigrationquestion.com. Stay connected and never miss an episode. On a last note, Attorney Jacob, what are the tips that you can offer for the applicants once the doors are open in the next few days with the registration process?
Yeah, I mean, feel free to reach out to our office by text or email. If you want any of your documents reviewed or if you'd like assistance completing the process, immigration is a journey. A lot of times it is, I understand it's a stressful process. So essentially what we want to do is just to make it as stress-free as possible and guide you from beginning to end. But at the very least, again, we're happy to guide you through the process just to make sure you have you know which direction to go.
Absolutely, Mr. Jacob. Thank you so much. A special thank you to you, our guest speaker, for sharing your expertise. It was such a delight having you join us today. We do not take your presence despite your tight schedule for granted, and we cannot wait to have your grace on our platform again.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks so much. I appreciate you guys. And keep in touch if you need anything. I'll be on the lookout for emails or phone if you need anything in the meantime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Attorney Jacob. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. Your interest and engagement makes the session valuable. We hope to see you at our next session, same time next Friday, as we touch base on the new asylum restrictions at southern border, what you need to know. We will be joined by Attorney Leslie Kirby, a refined U.S. immigration attorney ready to share his expertise with us. Until then, stay informed and empowered in your immigration journey. Have a great day.